Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Wild Files, the podcast where we unpack the people side of MSP life. I'm your host, Jane Matthews, founder of Wildcat Careers, where we work exclusively with MSPs to fix broken hiring processes, craft cultures people actually want to work in, and build teams that succeed. Now, if you've listened to this podcast before, you'll know that although I spend every day talking about recruitment inside MSPs, these episodes are very rarely just about recruitment. So hold that thought, because today we're talking about something that I genuinely believe sits underneath a huge number of hiring problems inside MSPs: drift. And no, not the sort you do in a car around a mountain road. A different kind of drift. The sort that quietly creeps into your business without anyone noticing. There's something I've observed over, after spending basically years working exclusively with MSPs. Businesses very rarely become chaotic overnight. I've never walked into an MSP where the owner said to me, "Jane, everything was perfectly fine on Friday, and by Monday morning we'd forgotten how to run a business." It doesn't happen like that. Instead, it's one tiny compromise at a time. One interview gets moved because a customer has an urgent issue, perfectly reasonable. Feedback gets pushed back until tomorrow because, well, everyone's tied up, also reasonable. Someone says, "Let's just wait until Sarah gets back from holiday before we decide." Again, completely reasonable. Individually, none of those decisions are bad. Collectively, they create drift. And that's why drift is so difficult to spot, because every single decision makes sense when you're making it. It's only 6 months later when someone says, "Why does recruitment seem to take forever now?" Nobody can actually pinpoint it. They can't pinpoint when it happened, because it didn't happen in one moment. It happened in 50 little moments. And that, for me, is what drift looks like. Now, let's take recruitment out of the equation for a second. Think about your own MSP. Has documentation ever slipped? Not because people don't care, because people are, busy. Have one-to-ones ever been cancelled? Not because leadership suddenly stopped valuing people, because, customers came first. Have projects ever overrun? Have internal meetings been pushed back? Has somebody said, "We'll sort that next week," only for next week to become, next month? We've all been there. That's not failure, that's business. The problem comes when those little compromises quietly become the way we work. Because once something feels normal, we stop questioning it. One of my favourite questions to ask leadership teams is simply this: when did this become acceptable? It's amazing how often the room goes really quiet, because nobody knows. Nobody made the decision. Nobody announced it. It just drifted. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges inside MSPs. You're all incredibly busy solving customer problems. That's your job. Customers absolutely should come first. But here's the irony. If recruitment continually comes second, eventually customers suffer anyway, because vacancies stay open, engineers become overloaded, projects take longer, response times slip, stress levels increase, and the very thing you were protecting starts to suffer. Recruitment wasn't competing with customer service. It was protecting customer service. That's a completely different way of looking at it. One conversation I had recently really stuck with me. An MSP owner said, "Jane, we just can't seem to hire." Now, whenever anybody says that to me, I become, slightly annoying, because I ask questions, lots of them. Not because I'm trying to catch anyone out, because I want to understand what's really going on. So we mapped out the recruitment process. What happened after the CV arrived? Who reviewed it? How quickly? Who booked interviews? Who gave feedback? Who made the final decision? And do you know what we discovered? There wasn't a recruitment problem. There wasn't even a candidate problem. There was an ownership problem. Nobody owned the momentum. Everyone was involved, but nobody was actually driving it. And every delay had a perfectly good explanation. The technical director was on site. The service manager had an escalation. The MD was with a client. The recruiter was waiting for feedback. Everybody was right, yet somehow the candidate was still waiting. Recruitment drift is rarely a hiring problem. is operational drift wearing a recruitment badge. Recruitment simply shines a light on habits that already exist inside your business. If communication drifts internally, it drifts externally. If decision making slows internally, it shows externally. If ownership isn't clear internally, it won't suddenly become clear when somebody applies for a job. Recruitment doesn't create those behaviors. It exposes them. And that's why I find recruitment so fascinating. It's one of the few business activities that touches absolutely everything. Leadership, operations, communication, culture, trust, decision making. It's all there. Which means if your recruitment feels slow, maybe don't ask, how do we make recruitment faster? Instead ask, what else has quietly started drifting? Because I'd be very surprised if recruitment is the only thing. Now, here's where I think most MSPs get caught out. They assume candidates understand what's happening behind the scenes. They don't. And why would they? If your service desk has exploded because, well, Microsoft has decided to improve something again, the candidate doesn't actually know that. If your technical director has spent 2 days on site dealing with a major outage, well, the candidate doesn't know that either. If 3 engineers are phoned in sick, again, the candidate has absolutely no idea. All they experience is silence. And silence is incredibly noisy. Stay with me on this. Because this isn't really about recruitment, it's about people. Human beings are brilliant storytellers. Whenever we don't have enough information, we make it up. Think about your own life. You send somebody a message, they don't reply. Within half an hour, you've written an entire documentary in your own head. They're annoyed, I've upset them, they're ignoring me. Then they ring later and say, sorry, I was in Tesco. We've all done it. Candidates do exactly the same thing. If you say, we'll let you know on Friday, Friday comes and goes, nothing. Monday arrives, still nothing. What story do you think they're writing? They've probably had a major customer issue. Well, probably not. They're more likely. They're thinking things like they've lost interest, they've found somebody else, they're disorganized, they don't really value people. Whether any of those things are true is almost irrelevant because perception becomes reality. And that's why communication matters so much. One of the biggest compliments Wildcat receives isn't, thanks for finding me a great job. Don't get me wrong, we get those. It's this, Jane, thanks for keeping me updated. Sometimes I actually contact candidates simply to tell them, I don't actually have an update today. And do you know what they usually say? Well, thanks for letting me know. That's it. Not because I solved the problem, because I removed the uncertainty. People cope remarkably well with bad news. What they actually struggle with is no news. And there's a lesson in that goes far beyond recruitment. Customers are the same. Engineers are the same. Your leadership team is the same. Silence creates anxiety. Communication, well, that creates confidence. And confidence is what candidates are really assessing. Not just salary, not just technology, not just whether they like the office. They're asking themselves, do these people look like they've got their act together? Because experienced MSP engineers don't usually leave one job just to find another. They're looking for something better, something calmer, something more organized, somewhere they can trust the leadership. And that's why I often say candidates don't experience your intentions. They experience your operations. If your recruitment process feels calm, they assume your business is calm. If your communication feels organized, they assume your leadership is organized. If your recruitment feels chaotic, well, you can probably guess what story they're actually writing. And that's the thing I'd love every MSP leader listening today to remember. Every interaction is evidence. Every email, every phone call, every interview, every promise you keep or don't keep. Because recruitment isn't just filling a vacancy. It's the first real experience someone has of your business. And first impressions have a habit of lasting a very long time. Now, here's something else I've noticed after spending years working exclusively with MSPs. The MSPs that tell me they're struggling to recruit are rarely struggling because there aren't any engineers. Now, before you all start shouting at your speakers at me, yes, I know the market is competitive. Yes, I know experienced engineers have choices. Yes, I know good people don't stay available for long. I spend every single day in that market. But that's not actually what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what happens once you've actually got somebody interested, because that's where I see businesses accidentally lose momentum. And momentum is an interesting thing. It's very difficult to create, but incredibly easy to lose. Imagine you're pushing a car. Getting it moving, well, that's hard work, isn't it? Once it's moving, well, it's much easier. Stop pushing, and eventually, well, it stops. Recruitment works exactly the same way. Every positive interaction creates momentum. A quick reply, well-organized interview, constructive feedback, a leader who turns up prepared, a phone call when you said you'd ring. Every one of those little moments pushes the car a little bit further. Then somebody disappears for a week. Momentum stops. Now, the interesting bit, when recruitment slows down inside an MSP, everybody assumes the candidate's lost interest. Well, sometimes they have, of course, but I'd argue something slightly different. More often than not, the candidate hasn't lost interest. They've lost confidence. That's a huge difference. Interest says, I like this opportunity. Confidence says, I trust this business. You need both. One without the other doesn't last very long. And confidence isn't built through grand gestures. It's built through consistency. That's something I've learned not just in recruitment, but in business generally. Wildcat hasn't grown because we did one amazing thing. It's grown because we try to do ordinary things consistently well. Reply when we say we will, ring people back, be honest. Admit when we've done something wrong. Keep communicating. Nothing revolutionary, just consistent. The best MSPs I've worked with are exactly the same. They don't feel impressive because they're flashy. They feel impressive because they're dependable. That's a very different feeling. Right, let's flip the conversation for a minute. I want you to imagine you're the engineer. You spent an evening updating your CV. You've had an initial conversation. You've booked time off work for an interview. You've sat in front of two directors. You've answered technical questions. You've asked thoughtful questions about the business. You've driven home thinking, I quite like them. Now what? Nothing. Monday comes, nothing. Tuesday, nothing. Wednesday, still nothing. At what point do you stop thinking they're probably just busy and start thinking they're probably not interested? That's human nature. We all do it. And here's something I don't think enough MSPs appreciate. The candidate isn't just waiting for an answer. They're making decisions while they're waiting. Should I continue with the other interview? Should I accept the other offer? Should I bother chasing them? Should I tell my partner this probably isn't happening? Life carries on. Recruitment doesn't happen in isolation. Candidates aren't sat at home staring at their inbox waiting for your email. They're carrying on with their careers. They're meeting other employers, talking to recruiters, having conversations. Every day you don't communicate, well, someone else probably is. Now, here's the bit that makes me smile. I'll often hear, we've lost another one, as though the candidate simply evaporated. No, they didn't disappear, they kept moving. Your process didn't. That's the difference. Now, one of my favourite observations inside MSPs is this. The businesses that recruit well often run meetings well. I know that sounds completely unrelated, but stay with me. Meetings start on time, people arrive prepared, decisions are made, actions are clear, people leave knowing who's doing what. Now, look at their recruitment. Interviews start on time, feedback is clear, ownership is obvious. Candidates know what happens next. See the connection? It's not recruitment. It's leadership. It's operational discipline. Recruitment simply reflects it, which is why I keep saying recruitment is operational reputation in motion. Not because it sounds clever, because I believe it's true. You can't fake operational maturity. Candidates spot it, customers spot it, engineers spot it, and eventually you spot it too. Usually when somebody says, we can't seem to hire anyone. Here's a little challenge. The next time someone tells you recruitment is slow, don't ask, how do we speed recruitment up? Ask, what else in our business has quietly slowed down? Because I'd be willing to bet recruitment isn't the only thing drifting. Maybe meetings are taking longer. Maybe some projects are slipping. Maybe one-to-ones keep getting cancelled. Maybe documentation is always a week behind. Maybe decisions are taking longer than they used to. Maybe people have started saying, we'll sort that next week, more often than they used to. Drift rarely travels alone. It tends to bring friends. And that's why I don't think this is really an episode about recruitment. I think it's an episode about paying attention, because the strongest MSP leaders I've met all have one thing in common. They notice small things, not because they're doing that micromanaging thing, because they're paying attention. They notice when communication changes. They notice when morale changes. They notice when meetings change. They notice when recruitment changes. And because they notice early, they rarely have to make dramatic corrections later. That's leadership. Not knowing all the answers, simply noticing what other people have stopped seeing. So where does that leave us? Well, hopefully not sitting there thinking, right, tomorrow morning we're redesigning our entire recruitment process, because that isn't the point. In fact, I'd probably tell you not to. One thing I've learned about MSPs is that they don't usually need more process. They need more intention. And there's a difference. You can have the most beautifully documented recruitment process in the world, flowcharts, interview scorecards, assessment platforms, decision matrices. Lovely. But if people don't communicate, it doesn't matter. If leaders don't make decisions, well, it doesn't matter. If feedback takes a week because everyone's just really busy, it doesn't matter. The process isn't the problem. The behaviours are. Behaviours, well, they're much harder to write down, but they're also much easier to improve. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you actually experienced your own recruitment process? Not managed it, experienced it. So imagine you're an engineer. You've heard of the business before. You apply, you receive your acknowledgement, you wait, you speak to somebody, you wait again, you have an interview, you wait again, you receive an offer, or perhaps you don't. What did that feel like? Not what happened, but what did it actually feel like? Because feelings create stories, and stories create reputations. It's fascinating, really. MSPs spend thousands of pounds every year trying to improve their employer brand. So new websites, new videos, new career pages, social media, office photography, all worthwhile. But do you know what's even more powerful? Doing what you said you were going to do. Imagine that. An employer brand built on consistency, not marketing. There's a thought. I often hear people talking about candidate experience. And personally, I don't really like that phrase, because I actually think it's wrong, because it sounds like something separate, something you bolt on to recruitment. I don't think candidate experience exists. I think business experience exists. Candidates simply experience your business before customers do. That's all. They're getting an early preview. So if your communication feels inconsistent, well, they notice. If your leadership feels calm, guess what? They notice. If people genuinely care, they notice that. If meetings start 20 minutes late because everyone is firefighting, guess what? They notice that too. Recruitment isn't creating those experiences, it's revealing them. And that's why I find it so fascinating. It's like taking the roof off an MSP for a few weeks. You get to see how it really works, not what the website says, not what the values say, what actually happens inside. Now, one of the nicest compliments I ever receive isn't, "Jane, you found us a brilliant engineer." Lovely though that is, it's when a client says, "You've made us think differently." Because ultimately, that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast. I'm not here to tell you there are 5 interview questions you should ask or 3 ways to improve your job adverts. There are plenty of people doing that. What I'm interested in is helping MSPs become stronger businesses, because stronger businesses naturally become better employers, and better employers naturally attract better people. It's all connected. Recruitment doesn't sit over here, culture over there, leadership, I don't know, somewhere else. They're all part of the same story. So if there's one thing I'd love you to do after listening to today's episode, it's this. Please sit down with your leadership team, grab a coffee, nothing formal, and ask one question. Where have we started accepting things that 5 years ago we'd have never accepted? Maybe it's recruitment. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's customer communication. Maybe it's documentation. Maybe it's meetings that never seem to finish on time. Maybe it's engineers carrying too much because nobody's had time to recruit. Whatever it is, talk about it, because awareness is always the first step. Drift survives because nobody notices. The moment somebody notices, things start changing. I'll leave you with one final thought. Businesses don't become exceptional because of one brilliant decision. They become exceptional because thousands of ordinary decisions are made well every day. And the same is true in reverse. Businesses rarely become frustrating because somebody made one terrible decision. They become frustrating because lots of little compromises quietly become, well, normal. That's drift. The encouraging part? If drift happens one small decision at a time, well, improvement works exactly the same way. One phone call, one quicker decision, one promise kept, one clearer update, one leader who says, you know what, we've let this drift. Let's fix it. That's all it takes. Not perfection, just intention. So thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. I never take it for granted that you've chosen to spend time listening to these conversations and, me talking at you. I genuinely hope they've made you stop and think. If this episode resonated with you, well, I'd love it if you actually shared it with another MSP owner, technical director, service manager, or leader, because these conversations aren't really about recruitment. They're about building better MSPs. And if we build better MSPs, we'll build better careers, better teams, better customer experiences, and a stronger industry for everyone. So next week, we're going to talk about something I see all the time. Everyone's involved, but nobody's responsible. And trust me, if you've ever sat in a meeting where 6 people had an opinion, but nobody ever made a decision, you're going to really enjoy that one. Until then, remember, be intentional, keep asking better questions, and above all, guys, stay wild.